The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. While some were speaking about how the temple was adorned with costly stones and votive offerings, Jesus said, "All that you see here, the days will come when there will not be left a stone upon another stone that will not be thrown down." Then they asked him, "Teacher, when will this happen? And what sign will there be when all these things are about to happen?" And he answered, "See that you not be deceived. For many will come in my name, saying, 'I am he,' and 'the time has come.' Do not follow them. When you hear of wars and insurrections, do not be terrified, for such things must happen first. But it will not immediately be the end." Then he said to them, "Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be powerful earthquakes and famines and plagues from place to place, and awesome sights and mighty signs will come from the sky." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
During this last week of the liturgical year, we read a lot of scary stuff here at Mass from the books of the Bible in which, well, there is some scary stuff. The book of Revelation so very often presents images to us that tend to make us pause, maybe arouse a little bit of fear. Today we've got the angels with the sickle, and of course that gave rise to the cartoon character of Death, knocking at the door, ringing the doorbell with a sickle in his hand. That's where that cartoon image or the image in art comes from. You sing the Battle Hymn of the Republic, and a lot of the imagery in there is that of the harvest that comes from the book of Revelation, and trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. Well, that comes from these readings. How do we hear them? How should we hear them? I think it would be good if we try to regain the perspective that the early Christians had when these particular passages in the Bible, in the New Testament, were being written for them, because they were a sign not of fear and dread, but a sign of hope. Why? Because those dreadful things were already happening to them. But they knew that the end of the world was not approaching, because they knew in the resurrection of Jesus Christ, the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, the end of the world had already happened. The death and resurrection of Jesus marked the end of the dominance of sinful self-centeredness as the controlling force in our world. The problem is, of course, 2,000 years later, we still see the dominance of sinful self-centeredness as the ruling power of the world. The conclusion of the end of the world has not yet come. But for people of faith, ourselves, the beginning of the end of the world already happened 2,000 years ago. So when people talk about, are we living in the last times? We don't know what the timetable for the future might be. We certainly do see dreadful signs all around us. All you have to do is turn on the evening news or open up the newspaper, and you see dreadful signs of many sorts all around us. But guess what? Those kinds of things have been happening for 2,000 years. The end times have lasted for 2,000 years, and the end times are still continuing. There were many moments in history when people were expecting the end of the world to happen right around the corner. One of the most dreadful was actually the 1300s, the 14th century, where very literally all of these things that Jesus speaks about, people were experiencing them, including the Black Death, which in the space of about 10 years or less throughout Europe, not merely decimated, but reduced the population of Europe by perhaps as much as 50%. Half the people of Europe died in the 10 years during the 14th century by the Black Death. We haven't quite experienced that sort of thing, at least not in our country, but we seem to be experiencing that in other countries. Just look at the news, at what's happening. But we don't know what the outcome will be, except that Jesus Christ, crucified and risen, has triumphed, has overcome all of that. And so we are living in a time not of dread and end of things, but of hope. We await the joyful hope of his final coming in glory.
A reading from the book of Revelation. I, John, looked, and there was a white cloud, and sitting on the cloud, one who looked like a son of man, with a gold crown on his head and a sharp sickle in his hand. Another angel came out of the temple, crying out in a loud voice to the one sitting on the cloud, "Use your sickle and reap the harvest, for the time to reap has come, because the earth's harvest is fully ripe." So the one who was sitting on the cloud swung his sickle over the earth, and the earth was harvested. Then another angel came out of the temple in heaven, who had also had a sharp sickle. Then another angel came from the altar, who was in charge of the fire, and cried out in a loud voice to the one who had the sharp sickle, "Use your sharp sickle and cut the clusters from the earth's vines, for its grapes are ripe." So the angel swung his sickle over the earth and cut the earth's vintage. Then he threw it into the great winepress of God's fury. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.